Most clients don't hide what matters to them. They say it, usually in the first few minutes, sometimes in the first conversation. It comes out as a sentence that sounds too simple to take seriously. We just don't want this to feel like the last project, or maintenance has always been an issue, or our teachers won't use it if it's complicated. And you hear it, you nod, and then you just move on. And then you spend the next 8 months designing around it instead of through it. You're listening to The Practice of Practice, a podcast for architects, designers, and emerging professionals navigating the gap between school and real work. We focus on the realities most people only learn through experience: workflow, judgment, responsibility, and time. It's not theory, it's practice. Here's what happens at the start of most projects. The client talks, you listen. You're taking notes, thinking about program, thinking about square footage, thinking about constraints. And somewhere in that conversation, usually early, probably offhand, they tell you exactly what the project has to do. Not in some brief, not in a formal requirement, just in a sentence. They'll say, "The last firm we worked with made everything so complicated that nobody used it." Or, "We've had issues with maintenance costs for years. That can't happen again." Or something like, "This community has very specific expectations about what the building should feel like." You hear it as context, you file it away, and you keep moving. Because it doesn't sound like a directive, it sounds like their story. But that's the misread. Early signals feel soft. They come without structure, often without documentation, and without anything that makes them look like a requirement. But they're usually the hardest constraints you're going to work with. The problem isn't that the client was unclear. The problem is that you were listening for the wrong format. School conditions you to trust structured information. Program, square footage, codes, budget. These come formatted in ways that register as real. They're written down. They're numbered. And they have authority. Client signals don't come like that. They come as stories about the last project, as reactions to something they saw somewhere else, as frustrations they've been carrying for years. And because they don't look like requirements, your training tells you they're probably not. The implicit belief is, if it's important, it'll show up more clearly later. Well, it probably won't. What actually happens is the signal that showed up early gets buried under drawings, coordination, options, and progress. And by the time you're mid-construction documents, nobody remembers the offhand comment from the kickoff meeting. The signal didn't get louder. It was just ignored long enough that it stopped being part of the conversation until it becomes a problem. That misread will actually cost you. You designed something correct. You solved the problem. You hit the budget. The drawings are all coordinated. And the client looks at you and says, "This isn't really what we were hoping for." Nothing's wrong. Nothing's broken. It's just off. And now you're in a round of revisions trying to figure out what happened. You have more meetings. There's more explanation. And then there's more redesign. This is not a communication problem. It's not a relationship problem either. It's early signal misalignment. The same stuff that we've been already talking about. We talked about drift and how direction disappears when no one holds it. We talked about how coordination problems are almost never technical. And this is both of those things combined. You drifted from an intent that was never formally anchored, and the friction that followed looked like a coordination issue, but it started much earlier. You didn't miss information, you misread the priority. And those are different problems with different solutions. Clients don't communicate in architectural structure. They communicate in their priorities. And when you learn to read it that way, most of what they say early becomes very useful very fast. There are a few different signal types you'll hear. The first is the pain signal. They'll say, "The last project didn't work. We've had issues with something for years." Pain signals tell you what they will not accept. Whatever caused that pain before is now a non-negotiable item for them, even if they never frame it that way. They're not going to give you a requirement, but they're giving you a boundary. The second signal is fear. They'll say, "We don't want this to get out of control. We're worried about the timeline," or "We need to make sure costs don't run away." Fear signals tell you how decisions will get made. When there's a choice between two options and one of them feels risky, they will choose the other one every time, without exception, because fear defines the decision boundary before you even present anything. Then there's identity signal. We want this to feel like us. Or our community expects a certain kind of building. Or this has to represent what we stand for. These statements feel abstract, but they're not. Identity signals drive design direction more than program does. If something is technically correct but doesn't feel right to them, they'll reject it. That feeling is tied to identity, and identity is non-negotiable in a way that square footage is not. Then there's the operational signal. Staff won't use this if it's complicated. Or maintenance of this has to be simple. Or whoever comes after me still has to be able to run this. Operational signals are the most frequently ignored. They feel like a minor concern at the design phase, and they are a major concern in real life. And they override design intent the moment the building is occupied. The client isn't being unclear. They're just not speaking in the same language that you were trained to listen for. And even when you catch the signal, the system works against you. Because what looks like work is drawings, options, progress, a model that's further along than last week. The pull is always towards production, toward visible output. An early signal alignment doesn't look like anything. It's a conversation, a note you took, or a phrase you repeated back. It doesn't show up in the file. So you move towards what generates visible progress, and without realizing it, you start solving before you've anchored. We talked about this earlier on. Motion replaces orientation. You can be busy and completely off course at the same time. The particular version of that here is you start defending work built on weak alignment. The longer you work on something, the harder it is to question the foundation it's built on. So by the time a client reacts negatively, you're 3 months in and you have a design you believe in, and the misalignment that started in the kickoff meeting is now a big conflict. You didn't drift slowly, you drifted immediately without noticing because the signal wasn't in a format you recognized as important. Senior people aren't better at this because they're better designers. They're better at holding intent. The difference is behavioral, not technical. They write down what clients say in the exact words that they spoke, not a paraphrase, not an interpretation, the phrase. Maintenance has been a nightmare. That goes in the notes verbatim. Then they use that language back in the next meeting. They say, "You mentioned maintenance has been a problem. Let's walk through how this decision addresses that." They're not just being attentive, they're creating a thread, a reference point that lives across the project. And when the options come up, when there's a choice between something more complex and more simple, they'll filter it through the signal. They'll kill an idea that conflicts with it early before anyone gets attached to them. They're protecting something the client has said in the first meeting. That's the skill, not insight, not experience with similar building types. The ability to hold something across time and keep it relevant when the pressure is to move forward. You don't need authority to do this. You need a habit. Write down client phrases during meetings, actual phrases, exact words. Reuse that language in meetings when you're presenting about something. Connect it explicitly. Say, "This is directly tied to what you said about maintenance." Then ask one question when priorities feel like they might be shifting. Say, "Is this still the priority?" That's really it. It's not a process, not a system, a small behavioral shift that changes how you show up from meeting to meeting. The transition you're making is from presenting ideas to connecting ideas to signals. Presenting ideas. Here's what we came up with. Connecting ideas to signals. Here's what we came up with, and here's how it responds to what you told us matters. That second one builds trust faster. It shows the client that they were heard, not generally, but specifically. And that's a different kind of alignment than just delivering good work. Now, here's the hard part. You can work hard. You can care. You can produce solid work. And it's technically correct, well coordinated, and thoughtfully designed. And then still get pulled off course. Not because you weren't good enough, because you optimized the wrong thing. Effort without alignment is movement. It produces output. It does not produce direction. And the frustrating version of this, the one nobody tells you about early, is that you can be completely wrong about what the project needs and not know it until you're too far in to fix it cheaply. Because client signals from the kickoff meeting don't look like a requirement. Because there was no formal document anchoring it. Because the system rewarded you for moving forward and you move forward. That's the trap. Not incompetence, not carelessness, a misread about what counted as important information. Most projects don't get off track because people didn't care or didn't work hard. They get off track because someone missed what mattered early. Not because the client didn't say it, because it didn't sound important enough at the time. The client told you the truth in the first meeting. You just didn't recognize it as the truth yet. That's the shift. Not learning to listen harder, learning to listen for different things. Pain signals, fear signals, identity signals, and operational signals. They're there. They're early. And they're usually in one sentence. Your job is to write it down. And here's what makes it unavoidable. Those early signals you didn't catch, they don't disappear. They wait. And then they show up in RFIs, in coordination conflicts, and things that don't quite work in the field. In the moment someone is standing in a finished space asking why it doesn't function the way they expected. Because construction has a way of exposing every assumption you made upstream, every decision that felt fine at the time, every trade-off you made without checking it against what the client actually said. That's what we're getting into next. What construction reveals and what you can do about it before you get there. The practice of architecture is not intuitive, but it is learnable. So don't worry. We'll keep building from here. This podcast only works if it gets passed along. Not because of me, but because the hardest parts of practice are usually learned in isolation. If this episode put words to something you've been struggling with, share it with someone earlier in practice or leave a comment naming the moment that hit. I'm doing this because I remember how long it took to realize that I wasn't behind. I just wasn't being taught. Most of what feels like a personal failure in this profession is actually a shared pattern. The more we name those patterns, the faster we all get better. I'll see you in the next one.